What is the one certainty no mind can fully escape? It is not the rising sun or the pull of gravity, but the shadow that follows every life, death. Across centuries, civilizations have treated this inevitability with reverent fear, denial, or surrender. Ancient Egyptians built pyramids, monumental defiance, their tombs filled with treasures meant to outwit decay. In contrast, Buddhists embrace death as a passage, a release from cycles of suffering, not a catastrophe, but an evolution. Culture shapes the lens, and through that, humanity negotiates the tension between resisting oblivion and accepting dissolution. Biology, however, is indifferent to belief. Every organism, from the shortest-lived mayflower to the centuries-old sequoia, exists within cellular limits. Senescence, the gradual deterioration of function, is coded into DNA. Telomeres shorten, errors accumulate, and entropy wins its silent war. Death is not an accident, but a design, an integral feature, ensuring renewal, adaptation, and evolution. Without death, ecosystems would collapse under the weight of unchecked survival. Forests would choke, oceans stagnate, and life itself would lose its capacity to reinvent itself. What feels like tragedy from an individual vantage become, on the biological scale, the very engine of diversity. Science intensifies the paradox. On one hand, medicine extends longevity with vaccines, surgeries, and genetic intervention. On the other hand, physics and cosmology remind us that not only organisms but stars, galaxies, even the universe itself march toward ending. The human body is finite, but so too is every celestial furnace burning in the night sky. When scientists calculate half-lives or model cosmic entropy, they reveal a sobering symmetry. Mortality is universal. Stars collapse into black holes, humans collapse into silence. Both follow laws beyond resistance, yet resistance persists. From myth to modern laboratory, humanity has struggled against finality. The Epic of Gilgamesh tells of a king searching desperately for immortality, only to find his fate sealed. Today, transhumanist movements echo his longing, promising digital consciousness uploads or bioengineered cells without expiration. Silicon Valley billionaires invest fortunes into longevity research, attempting to purchase a reprieve from the oldest debt of all. Still, the question lingers. Even if death could be delayed indefinitely, would existence without its boundary retain meaning? Many philosophers argue it is the finitude of life that sharpens urgency, that love, art, and ambition burn brighter precisely because time burns out. Acceptance, therefore, is not submission but recognition. Stoics such as Marcus Aurelius counsel daily reflection on mortality, not as morbidity but as clarity. To live with death in mind is to live more deliberate. Indigenous traditions across the world often integrated death into life ritual, harvest festival, ancestor veneration, ceremonial burials not as interruptions but as continuations of the cycle. These perspectives suggest that resistance isolates while acceptance connects us to the rhythms of nature, to those who came before, and to the reality that each ending fertilizes a new beginning. Yet even acceptance is fragile. When illness strikes a loved one or tragedy arrives uninvited, the intellectual acknowledgement of mortality clashes with visceral grief. Humans oscillate between resistance and acceptance not once, but throughout. A child may fear the dark unknown. An adult may fight to preserve identity. An elder may soften into surrender. Death is not merely a biological event, but a psychological landscape traversed differently at each stage of being. And so we confront a contradiction at the heart of existence. We know death is certain, yet we live as though it is distant, postponable, negotiable. This tension fuels religion, science, art, and rebellion alike. It is the inevitability we resist, the certainty we deny, the truth we occasionally embrace. From pyramid stones to hospice care, from mythic quest to gene therapy, humanity navigates between two poles, acceptance of mortality and resistance against it. And in that navigation lies perhaps the deepest reflection of what it means to be alive. Death, then, is not just an end. It is the silent partner shaping meaning, the shadow against which light is defined. The story of mortality is inseparable from the story of life itself, and in exploring it, we prepare to ask a greater question. question. If death is inevitable, how do we truly live before it arrives? The dream of immortality. If death is the inescapable boundary, immortality is the dream that forever lingers beyond it. Across myth, scripture, and science, humans have long imagined ways to defy the final curtain. The oldest stories reveal a near obsession, Gilgamesh's futile search for a plant of eternal youth, the Greek god's ambrosia granting divine longevity, or the Taoist elixirs of ancient China promising transcendence. These legends do not merely entertain, they echo the deepest anxiety of humankind that without continuation, identity dissolves into nothing. Immortality, therefore, becomes not only a fantasy of survival, but a hope for permanence in an impermanent world. Religious traditions provided structured answers to this longing. Christianity spoke of resurrection and eternal life in the presence of God, framing mortality as a temporary threshold rather than an ultimate defeat. Hinduism and Buddhism envisioned cycles of rebirth where immortality was not endless physical life but the continuity of spirit across countless forms. Islam promised paradise, a perfected existence beyond earthly decay. These visions carried not only consolation but moral direction, lived virtuously, and eternity await. Immortality was not merely about escaping death, it was about living rightly in preparation for what followed. But alongside these promises, other cultures warned of the dangers of endless existence. The Greek myth of Tithonus tells of a man granted immortality without eternal youth, condemned to perpetual withering until his body became a husk. In such cautionary tales, the desire for immortality carried a shadow, the risk that eternity without change might be worse than death itself. Still, the yearning persisted, evolving as science advanced. By the Enlightenment, alchemists had shifted from mystical elixirs to proto-scientific experiments, seeking the philosopher's stone not only to transmute metals but to extend life. The modern age inherited this ambition but rephrased it in laboratories and algorithms. Transhumanism emerged as the boldest incarnation, declaring that technology could achieve what myth and religion only promised. Genetic engineering, nanotechnology, cryonics, and digital mind, uploading these proposals, echo ancient quests but reframe them with silicon and code rather than sacred ritual. Where once immortality required divine favor, now it seemed to demand innovation and funding. Yet the difference between religious and technological visions is stark. Religion offers immortality as a collective destiny, bound to faith and morality. Technology frames it as a project of mastery, often individualistic, accessible first to the wealthy or daring. In religious imagination, eternity is about belonging, being absorbed into paradise, nirvana, or cosmic order. In transhumanist thought, immortality often centers on preservation of the self, one's memories, one's consciousness, one's digital double stored in data centers. The soul is replaced by software, the divine by hardware. The tension between these visions mirrors the broader human divide. Some seek transcendence through surrender, others through conquest. But would technological immortality truly deliver what is promised? Imagine a consciousness copied into machine, enduring centuries of updates, migrations, and glitches. Is that still you or merely a replica? Religious traditions solve this with faith. The soul is continuous, the promise eternal. Technology leaves the answer uncertain, haunted by questions of identity. Moreover, the pursuit itself raises ethical dilemmas. If immortality becomes real, who gains access? Do only the elite transcend while others remain bound to mortality? Such divides could fracture humanity into species of the eternal and the expendable. Still, the allure persists. Cryonics facilities already preserve bodies and brains in vats of liquid nitrogen, awaiting futures where resurrection might be possible. Visionaries invest in anti-aging therapy, claiming that death is not a destiny, but a disease to be cured. These projects may fail like myths of old, yet they testify to an enduring human refusal to bow completely for oblivion. The dream of immortality, whether cloaked in scripture or wired into code, reveals the same hunger to extend meaning, to stretch, exists beyond its appointment. And so the dream persists, fragile yet unyielding, shaping religion, myth, sciences, and futures. From sacred text to Silicon Valleys, humanity stands between two horizons, accepting accepting death as inevitable, yet forever reaching toward eternity. But if immortality were possible, would life retain urgency, or would eternity dilute meaning? That question leads us into the next mystery: why mortality may not be a curse, but the very essence of purpose. Quantum immortality. What if immortality were not hidden in sacred scriptures or engineered in futuristic labs, but already coded into the strange mathematics of the universe? Enter quantum immortality, a concept born not from myth or theology, but from the bizarre logic of quantum mechanics. Unlike alchemy's potions or transhumanism's machines, this theory suggests that survival might be baked into reality itself, requiring neither divine blessing nor silicon ingenuity. It challenges every prior vision of escaping death by proposing something radical: that in the infinite branching of possibility, you never actually experience your own end. The foundation rests on the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, first proposed by Hugh Everett in the 1950s. According to this view, every quantum event does not collapse into a single outcome, but instead splits reality into parallel versions, each carrying one possible result. In one branch, a particle decays; in another, it does not. Applied to human existence, the implication grows uncanny. Each moment of potential death, car accidents, illnesses, even the gradual decline of aging, splits into universes where survival occurs. From your perspective, consciousness continues only in the threads where you remain alive. Thus, subjectively, you never die. At first glance, this idea feels like science fiction's boldest invention, yet it is not mythology cloaked in allegory. It arises from genuine physics debates about probability and observation. Unlike religious afterlives or technological resurrections, quantum immortality does not promise a paradigm or a perfect digital replica. Instead, it implies continuity through sheer statistical necessity. Somewhere, in some branch, you always make it through. For the individual, this could feel like eternity without intervention, but such immortality is unsettling. It is not a life of joy, but one of narrowing odds. In each branching, countless versions of you perish, while one thread survives against decreasing probability. Imagine surviving an accident by improbable chance, only to face another improbable escape later, and another after that. Eventually, the thread that continues may represent existence stripped of companion, health, or stability. Immortality, in this framework, is not triumph, but isolation, a consciousness condemned to stagger forward while most other versions fall away. Here lies the sharp contrast with earlier vision. Religion framed immortality as reward, suffused with belonging and transcendent. Technology framed it as mastery, preserving identity through control. Quantum immortality offers neither. It is indifferent, even cruel, granting survival without comfort, inevitability without grace. Where myths sought meaning and science sought solution, this theory strips both, presenting survival as a statistical artifact rather than a blessing. Still, the idea fascinates because it destabilizes certainty. If consciousness is tied to probability, then subjective experience might never include death itself. You may witness everyone else's ending, yet never your own. Philosophers compare this to a cosmic trapdoor. From the inside, mortality becomes unobservable. The thought is both exhilarating and terrifying. Exhilarating because it hints at survival beyond the imaginable. Terrifying because it suggests eternity might not be freedom, but perpetual endurance without end. Critics argue that quantum immortality is more thought experiment than reality. It cannot be tested, and it relies on interpretations of quantum mechanics that remain controversial. Yet its very existence in scientific discourse illustrates the length to which humans stretch imagination when confronting death. Where myths and technologies reflect human desire, quantum immortality reflects the unsettling consequences of physics itself. So, is this immortality or something darker? Is it liberation from death or an endless drift through improbable survival? Unlike myth or machine, quantum immortality does not console. It confronts us with a haunting possibility that escaping death may not mean transcending it, but enduring it forever. And in that unsettling vision, we begin to ask, what if immortality itself is the greater burden? The quantum lens on existence. What does it mean to die? In classical thinking, the answer is brutally straightforward. forward, organism ceases to function, its biological systems shut down, and its narrative ends. There is no ambiguity, no alternative storyline, no lingering possibility. Death, in the classical worldview, is absolute, like a door slamming shut with finality. From the fall of a sparrow to the collapse of a star, outcomes are singular and irreversible. Biology reinforces this perspective. Once cells stop replicating, once neural activity ceases, consciousness extinguishes permanently. In this framework, survival is simply the avoidance of death, a binary state measured in on or off. Probability, in classical terms, describes only the likelihood of reaching that final state. A doctor may say you have a 10% chance of surviving surgery or a 50% chance of living 5 more years, but the eventual outcome collapses to one result. Either you live or you don't. Mathematics are statistical tools for prediction, not descriptions of multi-reality. Classical probability is a map of risks pointing toward a single, unfolding path where each decision, chance event, eliminate alternatives forever. Once the die is cast, only one number shows. Quantum mechanics, however, shatters this neat binary. In its probabilistic universe, outcomes are not discarded but multiplied. When a particle exists in a superposition, both decayed and undecayed, both here and there, the act of measurement determines which branch becomes visible. Hugh Everett's many worlds interpretation radicalized this idea by suggesting that all possibilities are realized but in separate parallel reality. In this view, probability is not just prediction but branching structure, a cosmic tree where every fork is traveled by some version of reality. Applied to survival, the implications are staggering. In the quantum frame, death is not a singular, absolute termination. Each moment where death is possible becomes a point of divergence. In some branches, you perish. In others, you survive. Consciousness, tethered to survival by necessity, may only experience those continuations where life persists. Thus, while billions of branches contain your absence, the subjective thread you inhabit always follows survival. Death becomes, in this unsettling logic, something you never truly experience, only something others observe in the branches they occupy. This creates a profound tension. Classical mortality offers closure. The end is certain, the story concludes. Quantum probability, by contrast, offers a narrative that never closes from the inside. Survival becomes not just a chance, but a guarantee somewhere, and the individual always perceives that somewhere. Imagine facing a 1% survival rate in a disaster. Classically, it means grim odds with one definitive outcome. Quantumly, it means that in 99 branches you perish, but in one you endure, and in that branch you continue to tell the story. From your perspective, survival was inevitable. Yet such inevitability is deceptive. It does not negate the existence of countless branches where death occurs. It only reframes perspective. You, the conscious observer, never cross into those dead-end narratives. Survival becomes less about biological triumph and more about probabilistic selection. This raises disturbed question. Does probability guarantee eternal continuation, or does it simply delay the inevitable across infinite branches of dwindling likelihood? Are we truly immortal in such a framework, or merely clinging to improbable continuities while all others collapse? The contrast could not be sharper. Classical thought offers certainty, finality, and perhaps meaning in closure. Quantum probability dissolves that certainty, replacing it with endless branching and an unsettling form of survival without definitive end. One worldview grounds us in absolutes, the other casts us adrift in infinite possibilities, and within that gulf lies a deeper reflection. If probability reshapes survival itself, then our understanding of life and death may be less about ending and more about the pathways we imagine still open. The Schrödinger's cat paradox view. Thought experiments capture the strangeness of quantum mechanics as vividly as Schrödinger's cat. Proposed in 1935, it was meant as a critique, not a celebration, a way for Erwin Schrödinger to illustrate just how absurd quantum principles appear when scaled to everyday life. Imagine the setup: a cat sealed in a box with a vial of poison, triggered by the decay of a single radioactive atom. If the atom decays, the vial shatters and the cat dies. If not, the cat lives. According to quantum rules, until observed, the atom exists in superposition both decayed and undecayed. Therefore, the cat, entangled with this fate, is simultaneously alive and dead. From the perspective of the outside observer, the paradox is compelling. The box represents uncertainty, a black veil behind which reality holds two incompatible truths. At one, only when the lid opens does the wave function collapse, forcing the universe to choose between life and death. To the observer, probability dominates. Reality seems suspended until consciousness peers inside. In this framing, the cat becomes an object of speculation, its existence reduced to percentages and equations, its destiny unknowable until revealed. But consider the paradox from the cat's point of view. For the feline, there is no superposition. Subjectively, it is either alive, experiencing the confines of the box, or dead, experiencing nothing at all. There is no blurred existence where the cat both purrs and perishes. Consciousness does not perceive probability, it perceives outcome. The paradox thus highlights a split between the observer's mathematical description of reality and the participant's lived experience. To the physicist, the cat straddles state. To the cat, there is only continuity until the end. This dual framing echoes the human confrontation with mortality. To doctors, scientists, or philosophers, death may appear as a matter of probability curve, survival rate, or abstract model. To the individual facing danger, however, the experience is singular. Either survival continue or consciousness cease. We never feel ourselves suspended in a half-alive, half-dead limbo. We only ever live through one branch. In this sense, each of us is both the observer and the cat, calculating probabilities from a distance, yet subjectively confined to one outcome when the box of reality opens. Quantum immortality extrapolates this paradox to unsettling extreme. If many worlds theory is correct, then from the cat's perspective, there will always be a branch in which it survives. Opening the box does not erase those other possibilities, it simply determines which one the observer inhabits. In some universes, the cat is dead, mourned by the scientist. In others, it lives on, never knowing how narrowly it escaped. Consciousness, tied to survival, may experience only the latter. From within, the cat might feel immortal, even though countless other versions lie still in countless boxes. This contrast underscores the strangeness of perspective in quantum mechanics. The observer sees probability collapsing into one definite outcome. The participant, whether cat or human, experiences seamless continuity, never sensing the alternative versions where they did not endure. Death, therefore, may be unobservable from the inside, existing only in the view of others. Schrödinger's cat, then, is more than a playful metaphor. It is a mirror for our own existential dilemma. Are we defined by the probabilities described by science or by the continuity of consciousness we each inhabit? Does death exist as a personal experience or only as something observed by others when our thread ends? These questions turn a laboratory thought experiment into a meditation on life. Thus, the paradox bridges abstraction and intimacy. To the observer, the cat is both alive and dead until the box opens. To the cat, existence is indivisible until it isn't. And within this divide lies a haunting truth. Perhaps we too are suspended in quantum uncertainty, never to witness our own collapse, forever caught between perspectives of survival and oblivion. Survival through branching reality. Imagine standing at a crossroads where every decision, every chance event, every roll of nature's dice creates not one path forward, but many. This is the radical suggestion of the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. First articulated by Hugh Everett in 1957, it proposes that whenever a quantum event occurs, the universe does not collapse into a single outcome. Instead, it splits, producing parallel realities in which all possible results play out. From the decay of a particle to the trajectory of a bullet, each possibility unfolds in its own branch. Reality, then, is not a singular thread, but an infinite tree, endlessly forking. Applied to survival, the implications are staggering. Every time you face mortal risk, universes diverge. In some branches, you do not make it, but in others, you survive, perhaps improbably, perhaps miraculous. From your own perspective, consciousness continues only along those branches where survival persists. You never experience the universes in which you die because subjective awareness cannot extend into absence. Thus, within this interpretation, some version of you always lives on. It is not immortality in the classical sense, but survival by default through the structure of branching reality. This perspective reframes probability itself. Take a scenario with a 1% chance of survival. In the classical view, those odds mean near certain death. In the many worlds framework, however, both outcomes occur. 99 branches contain your demise, while one preserves your continuation. And for you, the conscious observer, only that single surviving branch is experienced. What seems unlikely from the outside becomes inevitable from the inside. In this sense, probability dissolves into perception. To others, you were lucky. To yourself, survival was guaranteed. The philosophical consequences are profound. If consciousness always follows the survival branch, then death may never be direct experience. You witness others pass, but your own ending is perpetually deferred. Each brush with mortality becomes another split, another narrowing of possible reality, yet always leaving one thread in which you remain alive. Survival becomes not triumph over odds, but selection bias written into the fabric of existence. Yet this vision is not without its shadow, for while you may always find yourself alive in some branch, those continuations might grow increasingly probable. You might survive catastrophes unscathed, while loved ones do not, or endure in worlds where conditions deteriorate. The branches of survival may become lonelier, harsher, more isolated. Immortality through branching, therefore, may carry not the promise of paradise, but the burden of endurance. What good is survival if it strands you in the least hospitable realities? The dream of eternal life transforms into the nightmare of endless continuation. Still, the allure persists because many worlds offers something neither religion nor technology could, a survival mechanism already built into the universe, requiring no divine grace, futuristic invention. It is not about changing biology or engineering eternity, but simply about recognizing the consequences of quantum mechanics. In this framework, you are already immortal, though not in the way anyone might have hoped. And so the question emerges, if you always survive in some branch, what does that mean for meaning itself? Does life lose urgency when its end can never be personally experienced, or does survival in improbable branches intensify its fragility? The many worlds interpretation does not resolve these dilemmas, it only deepens them. But in its strangeness lies a haunting possibility that survival is not a matter of chance, but the unavoidable byproduct of reality's endless branching. The immortality hypothesis. What is it like to die? Strangely, no one can ever answer. We can describe the process of dying, the shutting down of organs, the fading of consciousness, the silence that follows, but the actual experience of being dead is inaccessible. Subjectively, death is not something you live through, it is the termination of living altogether. From within, there is no sensation of absence, no lingering awareness of not exist, and this leads to one of the strangest implications of quantum immortality. Perhaps from your own perspective, you never actually experience a world in which you die. Consider personal continuity. Day by day, your identity feels like an unbroken thread, stretching from childhood memories to present sensation. This sense of continuity is what anchors the self. Even when you sleep, even when you forget, you awaken still tethered to the same stream of consciousness. Now imagine applying that same continuity to moments of mortal risk. From the outside, probabilities might predict your death, yet subjectively you cannot inhabit the outcome where your awareness ends. You always find yourself in the branches where you remain alive because those are the only branches consciousness can occupy. This creates a profound divergence between personal perspective and external perception. To the people around you, death is observable and final. Loved ones mourn your absence. Your body decays. Your name is etched into memory. They witness a closure you never feel. For them, the thread of your life is cut and the story ends. But from your vantage point, the narrative never stops. The odds may grow slimmer, the escapes more improbable, yet awareness persists in some improbable branch where you continue. To others, you are gone. To yourself, you always remain. The contrast is unsettling. In classical terms, mortality binds everyone equally. In quantum terms, perception fractures into a paradox. You become simultaneously mortal in the eyes of the world and immortal in your own experience. This is not the immortality of myth, where eternity is shared, nor the immortality of technology, where identity is preserved for others to witness. It is a solitary immortality, accessible only to you, invisible to those left behind. Philosophically, this raises eerie questions about what it means to exist. If your awareness can only ever follow paths where survival continues, then death is not an event you can know firsthand. But does that make it any less real? For your family, colleagues, and society, your absence is undeniable. For you, absence never arrived. Does personal continuity outweigh external senses, or is meaning bound to what others can observe? The implications stretch further. Imagine a soldier in battle, with countless versions of him perishing, while one improbably survives every encounter. For his comrade, he may have fallen 100 times, yet for himself, there is only one seamless chain of survival, however unlikely. The same logic applies to any individual. Each subjective thread represents uninterrupted life, while parallel worlds absorb the countless version that did not endure. To live, then, is always to occupy the improbable, while to die is always something seen from the outside, and yet this immortality may not resemble hope. If continuity guarantees you never feel death, it also suggests you may endure endlessly, even through improbable and painful conditions. Consciousness may not select the most pleasant branches, only the surviving one. The result could be an eternity of improbable survival, stripped of companion, carried into ever more unlikely futures. From your perspective, existence never ceases, but it may become a burden rather than a blessing. Still, the paradox forces us to reconsider the nature of mortality. Death, long assumed to be life's ultimate certainty, becomes something fundamentally asymmetric. To the world, you die. To yourself, you never do. The dissonance between personal continuity and external perception reshapes what it means to speak of endings. Perhaps death, in the deepest sense, is not an experience at all, but a description others give when your consciousness continues elsewhere. And so the question lingers: if you never truly encounter your own death, does that make
you immortal, or does it simply mean immortality is an illusion you can see?
Infinite life, infinite deaths. Imagine standing at the center of an infinite hall of mirrors, each reflecting not your present self, but the many possible futures branching from this very moment. In most reflection, you perish, struck by illness, accident, or the quiet decay of age. Yet in some, you survive, carrying on while the others fade. This is the unsettling paradox at the heart of the many worlds interpretation applied to mortality. For others, you die in countless universes, but from your perspective, there is always survival. To observers in those parallel branches, your life ends decisively. Friends mourn, families grieve, and history records your absence. In those universes, your narrative is complete, closed, and irreversible. Each death is final to the people who remain, who must go on without you. In that sense, death retains all its classical weight and absolute termination, confirmed by external witness. From the outside, immortality is nowhere to be found, yet your own consciousness tells a different story. Subjectivity cannot inhabit non-existence, so awareness flows only into the branches where continuity persists. When a car skids across the
road, some versions of you do not survive, but the one that narrowly escaped against all odds is the only one. Spirit from within, death is always deferred, always sidestepped, always something that happened to other versions, never to.
This produces a strange duality. To the universe at large, you are mortal. To yourself, you are unbroken. The symmetry between lives and deaths is staggering. Each instant of risk generates universes where countless you perish, while a smaller fraction endure. Across infinite branching, this produces an infinity of endings and an infinity of continuity. continuation, but consciousness travels only along the threads of survival, giving the illusion of permanence. You might feel indestructible not because you are, but because you can never be aware of the universes where you did not endure. Immortality becomes less a gift than a statistical artifact of branching probability. This contrast reframes identity. Which version of you is the real one? The countless who die, observed by grieving families, or the solitary strand of continuity you inhabit? From a global perspective, your survival is rare, perhaps even improbable to the point of absurdity, yet from the inside it feels inevitable. The dissonance creates a profound philosophical tension. Others live in a universe where you are gone, but your own universe is forever the one where you remain. The emotional consequences are equally complex. For those who loved, the pain of loss is absolute. In their world, your story has ended. For you, those worlds do not exist because awareness cannot cross into absence. This disconnect isolates the survivor. You continue, but without the shared continuity that once bound you to others. In one universe, your partner mourns. In another, you live on, but perhaps without. Over time, your survival may strand you in branches where fewer companions remain, until existence becomes lonelier with each improbable extension. The paradox thus holds both wonder and dread. On one hand, the thought that you might never experience your own death offers a kind of eerie comfort, a loophole against oblivion. On the other, it hints at an eternity not of paradise, but of endless endurance where improbable survival strand you further from the lives and loves that once gave meaning. Infinity, in this sense, is not liberation but alienation, and so we arrive at a haunting symmetry. Infinite lives mirrored by infinite death. To others, you vanish endlessly, cross
uncountable universe to yourself and your endless probable thread.
Mortality and immortality coexist, not as opposite, but as perspective. The world sees your ending, you see only your continuation. Both truths are real, yet neither captures the whole. This dual reality forces a deeper question. Is immortality meaningful if it exists only in your perception, while everyone else experiences your countless death? Or does meaning reside in the shared recognition of ending, the closure that your own continuity denied? Immortality or illusion? The thought of never truly dying carries an undeniable allure. Quantum immortality suggests that in the endless branching of possibilities, you always inhabit the thread where you survive. From within, this looks like perpetual life, promise that no catastrophe can ever erase your awareness. Yet beneath the surface lies a troubling question. Is this genuine immortality or nothing more than a quirk of interpretation, a trick of probability, mistaken for eternity? The promise feels intoxicating. Imagine a universe where every bullet misses, every illness spared, every accident diverts at the final moment. From your perspective, survival becomes a law as immutable as gravity. Death is something others experience you undergo only as rumor, never as reality. It resembles the religious visions of eternal life, but stripped of divine judgment, or the technological dreams of transhumanists, but without machinery. Here, immortality requires no prayer, no laboratory, only the structure of existence itself, yet cracks quickly appear. Immortality, in the traditional sense, implies shared continuity. You endure alongside others, remembered and recognized. Quantum immortality offers no such companionship. In most branches, you die leaving behind families and friends who grieve your absence. Their experience of your mortality is absolute, their world forever without you. Your survival exists in solitude, unnoticed, unverified. What kind of immortality is this if no one else can witness it? Furthermore, the very foundation of the idea rests on interpretation. The many worlds hypothesis itself remains controversial. While elegant, it is not the only explanation for quantum phenomena. Competing interpretation from Copenhagen collapsed. To pilot wave theory, deny the proliferation of branching universes altogether. If those views are correct, quantum immortality collapses into fantasy, a byproduct of speculative physics rather than a reality of consciousness. Belief in it may comfort, but belief alone does not transform illusion into truth. Even if many worlds holds, the assumption that consciousness chooses only survival branches is unproven. Why should awareness persist in improbable continuity rather than dissolve altogether? Some physicists argue that applying subjective experience to branching is an overreach, turning a mathematical model into metaphysics. The concept may be less about eternal life than about the limit of human imagination when confronted with death. And here lies the paradox. The theory comforts by suggesting you never experience your own end, yet it unsettles by reducing immortality to perception bias. You only ever find yourself alive because you cannot find yourself dead. But does that make you immortal or simply incapable of observing your absence? It is like mistaking a magician's trick for genuine sorcery. What feels like survival may be nothing more than the blind spot of consciousness. The distinction matters. If immortality is real, it transforms how we approach meaning, urgency, and fear. If it is an illusion, then it risks luring us into complacency, convincing us that death is avoidable when it remains very real for those around us. The difference between truth and misinterpretation defines whether this vision is salvation or self-deception. Ultimately, quantum immortality hovers in a twilight zone between possibility and illusion. It neither proves nor disproves itself, offering instead a mirror of our deepest desires. The promise is breathtaking, endless survival written into the fabric of reality. The danger is sobering that we mistake our inability to perceive death as evidence that it never arrives. Between promise and illusion lies the haunting uncertainty. Perhaps we are immortal, or perhaps we are only dreaming that we are. Consciousness at the edge. At the heart of quantum mechanics lies a question that unsettles both science and philosophy. What role does the observer play in reality? Is consciousness merely a passive witness, recording the unfolding of events? Or does it actively shape which events occur? The answer to this question determines whether we are spectators in a universe indifferent to us, or participants whose very act of observation sculpts existence. In classical physics, the observer
is irrelevant.
The apple falls whether Newton watches or not. The planet orbits regardless of who looks up. Reality, in this view, exists independently, indifferent to human attention. Consciousness may interpret the universe, but it does not influence it. We are passive recorders of truth that would unfold the same with or without us. The comfort of this model lies in its clarity. The cosmos is ordered, predictable, and unshaken by human awareness. Quantum mechanics, however, shattered that clarity. In experiments such as the double-slit test, particles behave as waves when unmeasured, but collapse into discrete points when observed. The implication is startling. Observation appears to determine the state of reality. The line between passive witnessing and active shaping blurs. Are we simply measuring, or are we
forcing the universe?
This paradox thrusts consciousness from the margins of physics into its center, raising the possibility that awareness itself plays a creative role in existence. For some interpretations, this influence is profound. The Copenhagen view suggests that the wave function does not resolve until observed, meaning the observer helps crystallize reality from a haze of probability. In such a framework, consciousness is not a mere bystander, but the catalyst that collapses superpositions into outcome. Life, death, survival, and extinction all may depend, at least in part, on the act of awareness. Here, the observer becomes an active participant, inseparable from the phenomena they observe. Others push back, wary of granting consciousness such power. The many worlds interpretation removes collapse altogether, suggesting all outcomes exist in branching reality, regardless of observation. In this framework, the observer does not shape reality, but simply travels through one thread of the infinite tree. Consciousness records, but does not create. We remain remain passive, carried along by quantum structure, mistaking survival bias for agency. Reality unfolds with or without our attention. We are passengers, not pilots. The debate touches more than physics. It strikes at identity itself. If we are passive witnesses, then meaning comes from interpreting a universe indifferent to us. If we are active participants, then meaning is amplified. Every observation contributes to the fabric of what is real. The former reduces us to record keep. The latter elevates us to co-creators. Both positions carry weight and both unsettle in different ways. From the perspective of mortality, this distinction matters deeply. If observation shapes outcomes, perhaps consciousness plays a role in selecting survival branches and active resistance to annihilation. If observation merely records, then survival is not chosen but inherited, a byproduct of probability. The difference is the difference between agency and inevitability, between immortality as participation and immortality as illusion. Ultimately, the observer's role remains unresolved, suspended between science and philosophy. Are we the audience of reality's unfolding drama, or are we actors, improvising the script as we perceive? The answer defines not only our place in the cosmos, but our understanding of life, death, and continuity. Perhaps consciousness is both witness and shaper, recorder and participant, forever entwined in the quantum dance. Continuity of self. When the universe branches into multiple realities, what becomes of you? This is the unsettling puzzle at the core of quantum immortality. If survival in one branch is guaranteed, does that survival preserve your authentic self, or does it merely create copies indistinguishable from the original? The question cuts to the heart of identity. Is the continuity of self a matter of biology, memory, or something deeper that resists duplication? In the classical view, identity is linear. You are the sum of your history carried forward through memory, experience, and bodily continuity. Survival means remaining intact across time, maintaining a single thread of being. Death ends this continuity absolutely, leaving no ambiguity about who you are or whether you persist. Within this model, there are no duplicates, no copies, only one unbroken narrative that either continues or ceases. Quantum branching disrupts this simplicity. When the universe splits, countless versions of you emerge, each bearing the same memories up to the moment of divergence. From an external standpoint, all are legitimate continuation, identical until they diverge into unique experiences, but subjectively, you can only inhabit one path. The paradox arises here. If multiple versions persist, which one is you? Do all count equally, or is your consciousness tied to only a single thread? Some argue that continuity lies in subjective awareness, not in duplication. From your perspective, you always feel like the same person, because memory and identity carry forward seamlessly. The fact that other versions exist is irrelevant. You never experience their outcome. Thus, you are preserved in whichever branch your awareness follows. In this framing, survival across branches genuinely preserves the self, even if countless copies simultaneously fall away. Others challenge this assumption. If every branch contains a version of you who believes they are the authentic continuation, then authenticity dissolves into multiplicity. Each copy claims legitimacy, but none can prove superiority. To an outside observer, there is no difference between the survivor and the fallen branches, only parallel selves equally valid. If identity can be duplicated, does the notion of a singular you collapse? Perhaps survival across branches does not preserve you at all, but proliferates version, each mistaking themselves for the original. This debate echoes in thought. Experiments like teleportation or digital mind-up. If your body is destroyed and reconstructed atom by atom elsewhere, is the new entity still you, or merely a copy with your memory? Branching realities present the same dilemma endless, suggesting that continuity may not be about persistence, but about perspective. To yourself, you feel preserved. To the universe, you are endlessly replicated. The implications for immortality are profound. If a survival across branches truly preserves you, then quantum immortality offers continuity without end. You never experience death because your awareness always rides the surviving thread. But if branching only produces copy, then you may still perish while other selves, indistinguishable but separate, live on. In this view, immortality is not yours but theirs, and your personal continuity continuity remains as fragile as ever. The tension lies in defining identity itself. Is the self a unique, indivisible essence, or is it simply a pattern of memories and perception? If essence, then copies are illusions, and continuity demands singular survival. If pattern, then every copy is valid, and you exist in all branches simultaneously. Either way, quantum immortality challenges the idea of a stable self, replacing it with a spectrum of possibility where authenticity dissolves into relativity. And so the question lingers unanswered. When survival unfolds across infinite branches, do you endure or do you vanish while your copies march on? The continuity of self may be the ultimate illusion, one that comforts us with the feeling of persistence, even as reality fractures endlessly beneath it. The fragility of identity. For as long as humans have imagined immortality, it has carried a promise of continuity, the same self-enduring across endless time. Religion assures the faithful of eternal union, technology dreams of perfect preservation, and quantum speculation whispers of survival through branching reality. Yet beneath this promise lurks a disquieting truth. The self may not be as stable as we believe. Eternal life, rather than securing identity, may expose its fragility, scattering it across infinite versions, each convinced it alone is authentic. Part of identity's appeal lies in its apparent solidity. Memory, personality, and narrative give us the sense of being a single, indivisible I. We imagine that surviving death, whether through paradise, digital consciousness, or improbable quantum continuities, would preserve that unity intact. Immortality feels comforting because it promises to protect not just life but selfhood. Without that continuity, what would eternity even mean? But branching realities complicate this picture. Every time the universe splits, a new version of you emerges, identical, until divergence begins. Each one carries the same memories, the same sense of self, the same conviction of being the true continuation. Yet they cannot all be the original you. The very existence of duplicates undermines the notion of identity as singular. If countless copies all believe themselves to be authentic, then authenticity loses meaning. Eternal life becomes not one seamless thread, but countless strands unraveling in parallel. This fragmentation unsettles the promise of comfort. From within, you feel continuous, unaware of the other branch. From without, identity fractures into a kaleidoscope of selves, each doomed to diverge. The immortality you thought was unbroken turns out to be conditional, preserving a sense of unity only by ignoring the proliferation of alternatives. If all are you, then none is unique. So, if only one is truly you, then survival may still fail and immortality collapses into illusion. Philosophers have long grappled with this fragility. Derek Parfit argued that identity may not be a binary state, but a matter of psychological continuity. What matters is not strict preservation of self, but the survival of patterns, memories, and character traits. In this framing, fragmentation is less threatening. Each branch preserves enough of you to count as a continuation. But this comfort comes at a cost. If identity is just a pattern, then individuality itself may be an illusion. You are not an essence carried forward, but a configuration endlessly replicated and altered. Immortality, then, preserves not you, but variations of you. This reframing destabilizes the comfort of eternal life. To believe in immortality is to assume the self is solid, persisting intact. But if selfhood is fragile, then eternity reveals not continuity but multiplicity, and multiplicity fractures meaning. Who are you if infinite versions exist, each living different outcomes, each convinced of their uniqueness? The more reality branches, the less secure identity feel. Immortality begins to look less like an eternal fortress and more like a house
of mirrors. And yet, this fragility may itself be the lesson. Perhaps identity was never fixed, only a story the brain tells to impose order, continuity. Perhaps immortality exposes the truth that the self's dynamic, shifting, never singular.
If so, then the comfort of eternal life dissolves, replaced by a sobering recognition survival does not guarantee stability. Immortality, stripped of unity, may feel less like salvation and more like fragmentation without end. Thus, the promise of eternal life holds both solace and terror. It reassures us with the the possibility of unbroken survival, yet unsettles us with the spectre fractured cell. Between comfort and disquiet lies the fragile reality of identity, an idea we cling to even as the universe endless divides. Physics meet philosophy. Are our choices truly our own, or are they illusion scripted
by the universe long before we make?
This question, ancient yet unresolved, lies at the heart of human identity. On one side stands classical determinism, envisioning the cosmos as a perfectly predictable machine. On the other stands quantum indeterminacy, a realm of probabilities and uncertainty where the future resists calculation. Between them lies the question of free will. Are we autonomous agents or passengers on rails laid down by nature's law? In the deterministic worldview, every event follows inevitably from what came before. If we knew the position and velocity of every atom, Laplace once argued, we could predict the entire past and future with absolute certainty. The universe in this picture is a grand clockwork, each gear turning precisely, leaving no room for spontaneity. Human decisions, no matter how personal they feel, are the product of prior causes, genetics, environment, and chemical reactions in the brain. What seems like freedom is only complexity too vast to calculate. In this model, free will dissolved into illusion. Yet the rise of quantum mechanics cracked this certainty. At the smallest scale, particles do not behave predictably but probabilistically. An electron's position cannot be pinned down until observed. A radioactive atom decays not at a predetermined moment, but at random. Reality itself seems to harbor indeterminacy, suggesting that the universe is not a rigid script, but a field of possibility. Where classical determinism left no space for freedom, quantum theory opens the door, though not to control, but to chance. Does randomness equal free
will?
Not exactly. A coin flip is unpredictable, but it is not chosen. If a human thought were governed solely by quantum indeterminacy, then our decisions might be random rather than free. But the indeterminacy introduces something profound: unpredictability. The future cannot be entirely foreseen, not even in principle. This unpredictability breaks the iron grip of determinism, leaving space, however narrow, for novelty to arise. Between necessity and randomness lies the possibility of agency. Some philosophers argue that free will may be compatible. Even in a deterministic system, choices can still be meaningful if they arise from the self, shaped by one's reasons and desires. Others insist that without genuine openness in the future, freedom is an illusion. Quantum indeterminacy, by introducing real openness, seems to restore this possibility. Perhaps our minds harness uncertainty not as chaos, but as raw material for decision, shaping probabilities into choice. The implications ripple into mortality and survival. If the universe is deterministic, then every death is inevitable, written long before birth. The timing of your final breath was fixed from the start, and no choice could alter it. But in a quantum universe, outcomes branch, probabilities diverge, and survival may exist in some paths while ending in others. Here, the concept of choice blurs. Are we choosing our path, or merely inhabiting one outcome among many? Free will and fate intertwine, neither wholly controlling the script. This tension reframes how we think about responsibility. In a deterministic world, blame and praise lose force, for actions were always predestined. In a quantum world where indeterminacy introduces uncertainty, responsibility regains weight. Our choices might not be uncalled, but they are not foreordained either. Each act becomes a negotiation with probability, a shaping of uncertain futures. And so we stand between two visions: determinism, where choice is illusion, and indeterminacy, where choice becomes possible but never absolute. Perhaps free will is not total sovereignty, but the ability to navigate uncertainty, to carve identity out of chance. The future, then, is neither fixed nor formless. It is a structured possibility awaiting the choices we believe we make. Death, meaning, and the infinite. Why do we cherish moments? Why do achievements, relationships, and even fleeting joys feel weighted with significance? One answer lies in their scarcity. Death, as the horizon of life, gives urgency to experience. We know the clock is ticking and that awareness sharpens the taste of every moment. Yet what happens if death is removed from the equation? If immortality, whether through divine promise, technological achievement, or quantum survival, stretches life into infinity, does meaning evaporate or does it transform? For lives bound by finitude, meaning often emerges from the confrontation with limits. A love letter carries force because it may be the last. A sunrise is treasured because we know we will not see infinite dawn. The Stoics taught that meditating on death makes us live more deliberately. The Buddhists saw impermanence as the essence of beauty. Mortality shapes purpose not by denying life, but by framing it. Each decision matters precisely because it cannot be endlessly revived. To live well is to live knowing the story ends. Contrast this with endless existence. Imagine a life without deadlines where centuries stretch ahead without fear of finality. Ambition may fade when time is infinite. Urgency dissolves when nothing can be truly lost. A book can always be written tomorrow, a love always confessed in another century. Without the weight of endings, choices risk becoming trivial, endless, postponed. Immortality, instead of enriching life, may flatten it into monotony, meaning tied to scarcity, may wither in the face of abundance. Yet some argue the opposite, that infinite existence allows infinite exploration. With eternity, one might master every art, travel every world, experience every possibility. Where mortality confines us to fragments, immortality promises completion. Life becomes not a sprint against time, but an endless unfolding of discovery. Here, meaning shifts from urgency to expansion, from scarcity to abundance. To live forever is to continually remake oneself, finding new purposes in the boundless canvas of time. The debate exposes a paradox. Finitude intensifies meaning but limits experience. Infinity expands experience but risks diluting meaning. Death focuses while immortality disperses. Which is richer, the brief life burning brightly or the endless life stretching thin? Philosophers like Bernard Williams argued that immortality would inevitably lead to boredom, for any finite set of desires would eventually be satisfied. Others counter that desires themselves evolve, ensuring that eternity always holds novelty. The truth may lie not in one extreme, but in the tension between them. Quantum immortality complicates this even further. If consciousness always follows survival branches, then from within you may feel immortal, never experiencing death. Yet this immortality is not triumphant. It may strand you in improbable continuities where companions perish and worlds decay. What meaning survives when survival becomes endurance, when existence stretches on without guarantee of joy or purpose? In such a framework, immortality risks becoming not liberation, but entrapment, life stripped of closure, yet burdened with endless continuity. Meanwhile, those bound to mortality live with the opposite burden, endings that carve meaning into every choice. For them, death is final, but it is also clarifying. The poet's verse, the scientist's discovery, the lover's promise all resonate because they stand against impermanence. Their beauty arises not despite death, but because of it. Mortality reminds us that every moment is unrepeatable, every gesture a fragile offering against time. So does immortality undermine meaning, or does it simply redefine it? Perhaps both. Finite lives gain weight through limits. Infinite life through possibility. Each contains danger. Finitude risks regret. Infinity risks emptiness. Meaning then may not come from the length of life at all, but from how consciousness engages with it urgently when short, expansively when endless. And yet perhaps death remains indispensable, not as an end, but as contrast. Without the horizon, the landscape of life loses depth. Whether immortal or not, we may need the shadow of death to remind us why life matters. Ethics of immortality. Human ethics has always been forged in the shadow of death. Mortality anchors our frameworks of right and wrong, responsibility and consequence. When lives are short and fragile, decisions carry immense weight. How we treat others, how we honor the limited time we share, how we choose to live knowing that life will end. But what happens when death is no longer certain? If survival stretches indefinitely, whether through divine eternity technological breakthroughs, or quantum continuities, ethics itself may be forced to transform. Mortality shapes moral urgency. In a finite life, choices cannot be endlessly postponed. To waste years is to squander what can never be regained. Ethical systems rooted in mortality often emphasize compassion, justice, and legacy. How to live meaningfully within constraint. Religious traditions tie morality to death's inevitability, promising reward or punishment beyond the grave. Secular philosophies, too, stress the importance of fairness and care, precisely because life is brief. The brevity of existence magnifies obligation. We must act well because opportunities are finite. Contrast this with an immortal framework. If death never arrives, the calculus of responsibility changes. Time is infinite, so urgency fades. Wrongdoing might always be repaired eventually. Failures could be corrected across centuries. The weight of decisions could diminish as every mistake becomes reversible with enough time. Ethics, once sharpened by scarcity, risks dulling into complacency. If every choice can be undone, does choice still carry moral force? Yet immortality introduces new dilemmas absent from mortal ethics. Endless survival might amplify issues of inequality. Who gains access to longevity and who is excluded? If some live forever while others remain mortal, justice fractures. Power would concentrate in the hands of those who never die, creating hierarchies more rigid than any empire in history. Ethical frameworks for immortality would need to grapple with fairness across radically unequal lifespans. The question is no longer only how we live well together, but how we coexist when some cannot die. There is also the problem of responsibility across time. Mortality limits the consequences of our action. Future generations inherit our choices, but we ourselves pass on. In immortality, we would bear the long-term outcomes directly. Environmental destruction, exploitation, or neglect could return to confront us centuries later. Ethics in this context might demand greater foresight, since the immortal self cannot escape responsibility by dying. The very permanence of survival could force accountability across epoch. But another danger lurks: moral fatigue. If life stretches endlessly, empathy itself may erode. The suffering of others might lose its urgency when time offers no final closure. Immortals might detach from the struggles of mortals, their perspectives warped by distant ethics, shaped by endless survival, could become alien, focused less on compassion and more on efficiency, control, or self-preservation. The moral universe of an immortal may bear little resemblance to that of the finite human, and yet immortality does not guarantee ethical decline. It could also inspire expansion. If survival is endless, the horizon of obligation might grow wider, encompassing not just immediate community, but civilizations, ecosystems, even cosmic futures. An immortal being might develop ethics suited to eternity, patience, stewardship, and responsibility stretched across millennia. Where mortality urges urgency, immortality might cultivate continuity. The contrast, then, is profound. Mortality shapes ethics around brevity, fragility, and the urgency of now. Immortality reshapes ethics around persistence, foresight, and the challenge of fairness across endless time. Both frameworks reveal different facets of what it means to act well, and in imagining these contrasts, we glimpse not only how we might live forever, but how forever might change what it means to live right at all. Quantum experiments and speculation. When confronting ideas like quantum immortality, the first question any skeptic asks is simple: where is the evidence? Science, after all, is built on observation, measurement, and repeatability. Without these, speculation drifts into philosophy or myth. And yet quantum mechanics complicates demand, for it offers glimpses of phenomena that are undeniable while leaving their deepest implications forever uncertain. To understand the promise and the limits, we must separate what experiment reveal from what they cannot. On the side of evidence lies decoherent. Countless laboratory tests have shown that quantum systems exist in superpositions until interactions with the environment cause them to appear classical. Interference patterns in the double-slit experiment vanish when particles are observed, suggesting that multiple states collapse into one. Physicists now understand this not as magical, but as the inevitable consequence consequence of entanglement with surrounding system. Decoherence explains why we don't see everyday objects in superposition, even though the underlying physics permits it. This is real, testable, and repeatable. The quantum world does branch into possibilities, though we only witness one outcome. Experiments with entanglement strengthen the case. Pairs of particles separated by vast distances influence one another instantaneously, as shown in Bell test experiment. These results defy classical notions of locality, confirming that quantum mechanics truly operates on principles foreign to common sense. Such findings lend credibility to interpretations like many worlds, which propose that all outcomes occur in parallel rather than collapsing into a single reality. Evidence, therefore, supports the plausibility of branching universes, at least mathematically, even if we cannot step into them. Yet the limit equally stark. Decoherence explains why superpositions appear to collapse, but it does not prove that branching universes are real. The many worlds interpretation competes with others, such as Copenhagen collapse or pilot wave theory, all of which align with experimental data. No test can confirm one interpretation over the others because they all predict identical outcomes in practice. The branching may exist or it may not. Physics cannot yet decide. And then comes the greatest limit of all, consciousness. Even if branching is real, we cannot measure which branch an individual subjectively inhabits. Conscious awareness is not something we can attach a detector to, nor can we compare across universe. We cannot confirm whether a person's continuity follows only survival paths or whether death terminates experience absolutely. The very notion of testing quantum immortality collapses because any experiment requires observation, and observation itself is what is in question. This creates a profound boundary between science and speculation. On one side are experiments that confirm quantum indeterminacy, superposition, and entanglement, solid, undeniable evidence. On the other are interpretations about what those experiments mean for reality and for ourselves territory that may remain forever untestable. The physics allows the possibility of survival through branching, but the philosophy asks whether survival is experience. The gap between the two may never be bridged. Recognizing these limits is vital. Quantum mechanics offers us tools, not certainties about the self. Evidence shows the universe is stranger than classical thought ever imagined, but it does not resolve whether that strangeness guarantees immortality. To conflate possibility with proof is to step beyond science into belief. Thus we stand at a frontier where evidence illuminates and limits constraint. Decoherence and entanglement reveal that reality is probabilistic, branching, and interconnected. But whether those branches preserve consciousness forever or whether death remains, final lies beyond experiment. Here, imagination takes over where science must stop, leaving us with no answer but the profound humility of knowing that some mysteries may remain forever out of reach. Death-defying thought experiment if quantum immortality claims that you never subjectively experience your own death. The next question seems obvious. Can it be tested? Could someone design an experiment to confirm that consciousness always follows the branch of survival? At first glance, the answer appears tantalizingly simple. Place yourself in a life or death situation tied to a quantum event, say a device connected to radioactive decay. If many worlds is correct, then in at least one branch, you will survive every trial. Subjectively, you would always find yourself alive. Survival against impossible odds would serve as evidence. But here the thought experiment collapses under paradox. In the branches where you die, you cannot observe the outcome. For others, your death is final, unambiguous, and irreversible. They see no confirmation of immortality, only tragedy. The experiment produces contradictory results. Proof of survival, proof of mortality for everyone else. Knowledge becomes fundamentally asymmetric, locked to perspective. What looks like confirmation in one branch is meaningless in all the others. This asymmetry introduces an ethical trap. To run such a test requires willingness to risk death in most universes. From your perspective, you may never encounter those outcomes, but the versions of you in those branches still perish, leaving behind grieving family, shattered communities, and irreversible consequences. Even if you never experience it, the moral moral cost is real for others. The experiment sacrifices countless lives to prove a theory that only the survivor can affirm. It becomes indistinguishable from suicide repeated infinite. Philosophers call this the quantum suicide thought. Experiment and its very name underscores danger. While intellectually provocative, it cannot be ethically justified. Science depends on reproducibility and shared observation, yet this test guarantees results only for one observer. It produces no data accessible across branches, no evidence that others can verify. What kind of science is it if its results vanish into universes no one else can read? The very structure of the experiment undermines the principles of knowledge itself. Even attempts to soften the scenario collapse. Suppose one designs a harmless analog where a quantum event determines whether a light flashes or not. The results confirm probability but not immortality, because life and death are absent. To introduce mortality is to introduce irreversible ethical consequence. To remove it is to strip the experiment of meaning. Quantum immortality resists testing precisely because it relies on subjective continuity, not objective measurement. It hides in the blind spot of consciousness. This raises an unsettling possibility that the theory is unfalsifiable, forever beyond the reach of empirical science. It cannot be disproved since the survivor always survives, but it cannot be proven, either because evidence dies with the other branches. It occupies a liminal space between physics and philosophy, tantalizing but unreachable. The very act of testing collapses into paradox, and the pursuit of certainty risks moral catastrophe. And perhaps this is the ultimate lesson of such thought experiment. The desire to prove quantum immortality mirrors humanity's oldest longing to conquer death. Yet every attempt reveals not triumph but limit, the boundary between what can be known and what must remain imagined. Science can show us superpositions, decoherence, and entanglement. It cannot show us what consciousness does when life ends, because consciousness itself cannot report its own absence. Thus, the dream of testing quantum immortality is as impossible as it is seductive. Any experiment that seeks proof collapses under ethical weight, producing evidence only in branches no one else can see. What remains is not verification, but speculation, an idea that resists certainty by its very nature, daring us to live with mystery rather than mastery. Where physics stops, philosophy begins. Science excels at measurement. It maps galaxy time, atomic decay, and traces the subtle interactions of particles with extraordinary precision. But when the conversation turns to immortality, continuity of self, or the subjective experience of death, physics reaches its limit. Equations can describe probabilities, decoherence, and entanglement, yet they fall silent when asked, what does it feel like to die or never die? At this boundary, philosophy steps in, offering speculative frameworks where empirical tools cannot tread. Physics gives us solid ground up to a point. Experiments confirm that quantum systems behave probabilistically, that superpositions collapse into classical outcomes when measured, and that entangled particles display non-local correlation. These facts are real, repeatable, and verifiable. They establish that the universe is stranger than classical intuition ever imagined, yet they do not tell us which interpretation of quantum mechanics is true. Many worlds, Copenhagen collapse, pilot wave theory, each is consistent with the data. Physics can describe the dance of probability, but not the metaphysical meaning of the choreography. Here, philosophy enters, extending science into speculation. The many worlds interpretation suggests that every quantum event produces branching. Universes raising questions about identity, continuity, and choice. Copenhagen insists that outcomes are real only when observed, inviting debate about whether consciousness itself plays a role in shaping reality. These are not questions physics can resolve because they deal with meaning, not measurement. Philosophy takes the raw material of science and asks, what does this imply for existence, selfhood, and mortality? The line between physics and philosophy becomes clearest when considering quantum immortality. From a strictly scientific perspective, there is no experiment that can prove or disprove whether consciousness always follows survival branch. The claim is not falsifiable. It lies outside the domain of empirical testing, yet from a philosophical perspective, it forces us to confront profound ideas, whether death is ever personally experienced, whether survival defines identity, and whether immortality might be indistinguishable from illusion. Science describes probability. Philosophy interprets what probability means for the human condition. This division is not weakness but complementarity. Physics answers how the world behaves, while philosophy asks what it means. Without physics, philosophy risks drifting into ungrounded speculation. Without philosophy, physics risks ignoring the very experiences that make its discoveries significant. Together they form a dialogue. One maps the structure of reality, the other explores its implications for life and consciousness. Still, the boundary is often uncomfortable. Scientists may bristle at speculation that stretches beyond evidence, wary of diluting rigor with metaphysics. Philosophers may argue that avoiding these questions leaves the most important aspects of existence unexamined. The tension is productive. It ensures that the unknown is neither prematurely dismissed nor uncritically embraced. Quantum immortality, perched on this boundary, is a perfect case study. Scientifically unverifiable, yet philosophically irresistible. The contrast between science and philosophy reveals something deeper about human nature. We do not seek only to measure, we seek to understand. Numbers and equations satisfy our intellect, but meaning satisfy our longing. Death, survival, identity, these are not merely phenomena to observe, but experiences to interpret. Where physics stops, philosophy begins, because the hunger for meaning does not end where data runs dry. In this sense, the limits of science are not failures but invitation. They remind us that the universe is not only a puzzle to solve, but a mystery to reflect upon. Physics provides the fact, philosophy dares to ask why those facts matter. At the frontier between them lies the most haunting question of all, not whether immortality exists, but what it would mean if it did. Immortality in the human story. Throughout history, humanity has dreamed of escaping death, yet the response to immortality has never been uniform. Across cultures and eras, the idea of endless life has inspired awe, longing, suspicion, and even dread. For some, immortality is the ultimate promise. For others, it is a curse disguised as a gift. The cultural record reveals not a single narrative, but a spectrum of reactions shaped values, fears, and hope. In ancient Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh cast immortality as both tantalizing and unreachable. Gilgamesh's desperate search for eternal life ends in failure, leaving him to accept mortality and the legacy of human achievement instead. Here, immortality is desired, yet its absence is what gives meaning. By contrast, the Greeks told cautionary myths like that of Tithonus granted endless life but not eternal youth, condemned to waste away eternally. The message is clear: eternity without change may be worse than death itself. Greek culture admired heroic lives cut short in glory far more than endless existence drained of vitality. Eastern traditions reveal different tone. Taoist alchemists in ancient China sought elixirs of immortality, some emperors consuming dangerous concoctions in pursuit of eternal rule. Immortality here symbolized power and transcendence. Yet Buddhism approached eternity with suspicion, treating rebirth not as reward, but as bondage to suffering. The highest goal was not immortality, but liberation from cycles of existence. Hinduism, too, envisioned continuity of the soul, but ultimate meaning lay in release, moksha, not endless repetition. For these traditions, eternity without transformation was not salvation, but imprisonment. Religious traditions of the West framed immortality as promise. Christianity, Judaism, and Islam offered eternal life as a reward for faith and righteousness. Paradise became not an endless earthly life, but perfected existence in divine presence. This vision inspired hope, but also fear, for eternity could mean damnation as easily as salvation. Death was transformed from an end into a passage, and immortality became the central ethical horizon shaping how life was lived. With the Enlightenment came skepticism. As science gained authority, immortality through divine promise seemed less credible to some. Philosophers like David Hume questioned whether endless life would truly satisfy, suggesting boredom would drain eternity of meaning. Later thinkers, such as Bernard Williams, echoed the concern. Immortality might stretch desire thin until nothing felt urgent. In this skeptical framing, death was not only inevitable but necessary for life to matter. Modern culture reflects both enthusiasm and fear. Transhumanist visions celebrate the possibility of defeating aging, framing death as a technical flaw. To be fixed, Silicon Valley investors pour fortunes into longevity research, echoing the alchemists of old, but armed with gene editing and artificial intelligence. For these optimists, immortality is not myth, but engineering challenge and enthusiasm arises from the belief that survival is always preferable to extinction. Yet fear persists. Literature and film often portray immortals as weary, alienated, or monstrous figures who lose empathy, purpose, or connection as centuries erode meaning. From Mary Shelley's The Mortal Immortal to modern dystopias, the warning repeats: endless life risks hollowing out human experience. Even in popular culture, vampires embody this paradox: immortal, powerful, yet cursed with isolation and perpetual hunger. Skepticism also thrives in contemporary philosophy. Some argue that immortality would fracture identity. Copies, clone, or digital uploads may survive, but the authentic self may still perish. Others caution that access to immortality would deepen inequality, concentrating survival in the hands of elite. Cultural critique frames immortality not only as a metaphysical puzzle but as social danger. Thus, cultural reactions to immortality form a complex tapestry. Enthusiasm sees hope and transcendence, fear sees monotony and alienation, skepticism sees illusion and inequity. Across eras, the idea reflects what each culture values most: power, meaning, transformation, or justice. Immortality is never neutral. It magnifies deepest desires and anxiety. In the end, cultural history teaches that immortality is less about eternity itself than about how we imagine living forever. For some, it is paradise. For others, prison. For all, it is a mirror held up to human longing, revealing what we cherish, what we dread, and what we cannot stop dreaming about. The existential price of survival at first glance. The prospect of never dying seems like ultimate relief. No more fear of the unknown, no more dread of illness or accident, no more anxiety about when the end will come. The existential terror that haunts human consciousness would vanish, replaced by the certainty of continuation. Yet, when survival stretches into the infinite, the blessing begins to reveal its shadow. What starts as relief can, over time, turn into horror. Immortality does not erase existential burden, it reshapes it. Relief comes from continuity. Imagine waking each day knowing that no disease, disaster, or accident could ever extinguish you. The weight of mortality would lift, risk would lose its edge, ambition could expand across centuries. You could pursue knowledge without rushing, savor relationships without the looming threat of separation. For many, this dream promises liberation. Finally, time enough to explore, to learn, to create, to love. Where mortality presses urgency into every choice, immortality offers spaciousness. Life could unfold without deadlines, but the price soon becomes clear. Without death as a boundary, the meaning of choices risks dilution. When every opportunity can be revisited endlessly, decisions lose their weight. The urgency that sharpens love, art, and ambition may dissolve into procrastination or apathy. The very fact that moments are irreplaceable is what makes them precious. Strip away that scarcity, and eternity risks becoming monotony. The relief of survival curdle into boredom, an unending repetition without closure. Worse still is the erosion of identity. Mortality provides not just an end, but a narrative arc. We are born, we grow, we decline, we die. Immortality disrupts that rhythm. Over centuries, memories blur, relationships vanish, cultures collapse. The self you once were becomes unrecognizable. After countless transformations, what remains after 1,000 years? A stable person, or a hollow echo of all the identities shed along the way? Survival without death may preserve existence, but at the cost of coherence. There is also the burden
of loss.
While you persist, others do not. Even if you never die, companions, lovers, children, and societies will. Each cycle of connection ends in grief, repeated endlessly. The immortal may become detached, protecting themselves by withdrawing from intimacy. Relief from personal death becomes horror through perpetual mourning. Survival ensures not joy, but the guarantee of watching everything you value vanish again and again. Psychology itself may not be equipped for eternity. Human minds evolved to navigate decades, not millennia. Our emotions, desires, and motivations are tuned to a finite horizon. Immortality could stretch those mechanisms to breaking, producing alienation, disorientation, or madness. The horror of survival is not physical suffering, but existential dislocation, an endless self trapped in a world it no longer understands. This duality, relief and horror, defines the existential price of survival. The relief lies in freedom from the fear of death, the horror in the unending consequences of living without end. Writers from Mary Shelley to Jorge Luis Borges have explored this paradox, portraying immortals not as triumphant, but as weary, trapped, even longing for the relief denied to them. Their stories echo a deep intuition that death, however painful, may serve a purpose. It gives life shape, depth, and an ending that allows meaning to crystallize. Immortality, by contrast, risks eroding what makes us human. It promises safety, yet threatens purpose, offers continuity, yet undermines identity. The relief of survival is real, but so too is the horror of its price. To imagine eternity is to confront both, the thrill of never-ending life and the dread of life stripped of conclusion. And perhaps this is the ultimate irony. In fear of death, we dream of immortality. But in gaining immortality, we may find ourselves longing for death not as an enemy, but as the final gift that makes life worth living. Quantum, immortality, and legacy. For most of human history, immortality was less about living forever than about being remembered. Kings built monuments, poets wrote verses, and families passed down names, all in the hope that memory would outlast flesh. Legacy, not biology, was the human solution to death's finality. Yet quantum immortality offers a radically different vision. Not survival through remembrance, but survival through physics, where consciousness itself never ends. These two forms of immortality, legacy and continuity, reflect profoundly different answers to the same question: how do we endure? Legacy is collective. It depends on others carrying your story forward after you are gone. The ancient Greeks called this kleos, the glory earned through deeds remembered by future generations. To live well was to leave echoes in history, to have one's life woven into the narrative of a people. Religious traditions reinforced this. Children, disciples, and communities became vessels of remembrance. Even in modern times, careers, art, and family serve as conduits of legacy. Mortality is accepted, but memory becomes a kind of second life, extending influence beyond the grave. Quantum immortality reframes the problem. It does not rely on memory or community, but on the structure of reality itself. In the many worlds interpretation, you never subjectively experience death. Consciousness persists in branches where you survive, even as countless versions perish elsewhere. Legacy becomes irrelevant because, from your perspective, you never leave. There is no need to be remembered if you are always present. Immortality shifts from cultural preservation to personal continuity, from being honored by others to never losing awareness yourself. The contrast exposes strengths and weaknesses in both vision. Legacy provides meaning through connection. Your life matters because it shapes others, leaving ripples that continue long after your body fails. Yet legacy is fragile. Memories fade, monuments crumble, and even great names eventually dissolve into obscurity. Legacy does not preserve only the story of you. It is immortality by proxy, not by present. Quantum immortality, in contrast, preserves you directly, at least from your own point of view. No one needs to remember you because you never experienced absence. Yet this endurance is solitary. Others still mourn your death in their branches, still build legacies in your name. Their memories of you are real, even if you never experience them. Legacy continues for them while survival continues for you. The two forms of immortality diverge, leaving a gap between personal continuity and communal remembrance. This divergence raises philosophical question: which matters more, existing forever in some branch or leaving behind meaning in the branch where you do not? If quantum immortality is real, then personal survival may render legacy unnecessary, but also lonely, since memory belongs to others, not to you. If legacy is all that endures, then immortality is never for the self, but always for the community. Both offer endurance, but of different kind. One preserves awareness, the other preserves impact. Perhaps the deepest truth is that humans crave both. We long to continue experiencing experiencing, but we also long to be remembered, to matter beyond ourselves. Quantum immortality offers one without the other. Legacy offers the reverse. Together they reveal the paradox of human longing to live forever and to leave behind a story that outlasts even eternity. In the end, immortality may not be singular, but plural physics granting continuity, culture granting memory. Whether endless survival or lasting remembrance, each path answers the fear of death in its own way. And between them lies the haunting question, is it better to live forever or to be remembered? Can you ever truly die? Quantum immortality suggests a haunting paradox. From within, you may never die, yet from without, you perish in most universes. This tension creates the illusion of endless survival, a continuity of consciousness that feels eternal, even as objective mortality unfolds everywhere else. The self experiences an unbroken thread, while the world experiences countless endings. Immortality, in this framing, is not triumph, but perspective. Subjectively, the promise is irresistible. You never awaken into a world where you are dead. Every close call and illness survived, an accident narrowly avoided, a disaster endured, feel like improbable luck. But in your personal timeline, it is inevitable. Survival defines continuity. Like a river that always finds a path around stone and soil, awareness flows only through channels that persist. From your point of view, death is absent, always deferred, always something that happens elsewhere. Objectively, however, mortality reigns. In the vast branching of the multiverse, almost every version of you does not survive. For families and societies in those universes, your story ends. They bury you, remember you, and move on. Their grief is real, their world permanently altered by your absence. To them, you are not immortal, but fragile, as finite as every other being. The truth of your mortality is written into their histories, even as your subjective survival continues elsewhere. This contrast creates an unsettling dual reality. For the self, continuity never breaks. For the world, mortality never ceases. The two truths coexist without reconciliation. You are immortal in your perception, mortal in everyone else's. Immortality becomes not an objective condition, but a trick of perspective, a blindness to the universes where you are gone. The illusion of survival arises not from conquering death, but from never being able to witness your own extinction. The consequences are profound. If immortality is only an illusion, then it offers no guarantee of meaning, only endurance. You may live on in improbable branches, but those branches grow increasingly narrow, increasingly detached from the lives and communities you once knew. Your subjective continuity becomes survival without validation, existing in solitude while others remember only your mortality. Immortality without recognition risks feeling less like life and more like Philosophically, this tension mirrors the split between first-person and third-person perspectives. From the first-person view, life is seamless, unbroken, and eternal in its unfolding. From the third-person view, life is fragile, finite, and defined by death. Neither perspective can fully encompass the other. Quantum immortality highlights gap, making survival itself a matter of vantage point rather than universal truth. The illusion deepens when considering legacy. While you persist in some branches, your legacy belongs to the others where you did not. Your loved ones in countless universes mourn and remember you, shaping narratives of your life in absence of your present. Legacy and continuity diverge, leaving two parallel fates. You live on without being remembered, and you are remembered without living on. Immortality fractures into incompatible halves, neither complete on its own. And yet, the illusion may be all that matters. For the self, perception defines reality. If you never experience death, then subjectively you are immortal, regardless of what happens elsewhere. The illusion becomes indistinguishable from truth, because there is no vantage point from which you can compare the branch. You cannot step outside consciousness to witness your own absence. The illusion of endless survival becomes for you survival itself. Still, the dissonance cannot be ignored. Immortality that exists only in perception is not the same as immortality. That exists, in fact, it comforts, but it also deceives, offering eternity while leaving mortality untouched in the eyes of others. The illusion reveals both the power and the limit of perspective. What feels eternal may be nothing more than the blindness of never seeing your own end. In the end, quantum immortality may not abolish death at all. It may simply hide it, moving it beyond the horizon of experience while leaving it fully present in every universe you never see. Immortality becomes a shadow play, a survival not of the body or the soul, but of perspective alone. The human need for closure physics can describe particles, probabilities, and branching universes, but it cannot answer the most intimate question: what does it mean to die? Science explains mechanism, how bodies fail, how consciousness arises, from neural patterns, how quantum events unfold, but the human need for closure goes beyond explanation. We seek not only to understand death, but to face it, to integrate it into our stories and value. Without closure, survival, whether infinite or illusory, feels incomplete. Scientific models offer clarity but not comfort. They can tell us why cells age, why stars collapse, or why probability governs outcome, but they cannot console a child mourning a parent or a lover grieving separation. The equations of physics are indifferent to meaning. Death, for science, is an endpoint in biological function, nothing more. Yet for human beings, death is not just an event. It is the horizon that shapes how life is lived. To confront mortality requires more than mechanism. It requires meaning. Here lies the divergence between explanation and closure. Closure is psychological, emotional, and often spiritual. It is the process of accepting that life has boundaries, finding peace in endings. Rituals of mourning, from funerals to ancestral rites, exist not to explain death, but to help communities accept it. These practices reveal that humans do not need proof of immortality nearly as much as they need the ability to say goodbye. Closure is not about survival, but about completion. Quantum immortality disrupts this process. If consciousness never experiences death, closure becomes impossible for the self. You may never feel ending, only endless continuation. But this continuation lacks resolution, denying the finality that gives life shape. Survival without closure risks becoming a burden, existence stretched endlessly without the grace of conclusion. To live forever is to never finish the story, to wander through chapters without end. What science frames as possibility, psychology frames as dissonant. Life without closure feels incomplete. For those left behind, the situation is reversed. In most universes, you die and closure becomes essential. Families mourn, communities memorialize, cultures preserve legacy. Closure here is not optional, but a survival strategy. Without it, grief festers into despair. The rituals, stories, and spiritual beliefs surrounding death provide the living with tools to move forward. While science explains the mechanism of death, closure transforms loss into meaning. Where physics stops at description, human culture insists on resolution. This contrast underscores the limits of science in addressing human need. Physics can suggest that immortality is possible in some sense, but people still crave stories of endings, afterlives, or legacy. Religion offers one form of closure, promising reunion or transcendence. Philosophy offers another, teaching acceptance of finitude as the source of meaning. Even secular cultures invent narratives, whether through memory, art, or legacy, to grant closure where science cannot. We do not live by explanation alone. We live by stories that allow us to face the inevitable. The need for closure reveals something essential about human psychology. We find meaning not in endless continuation, but in cycles, arcs, and resolution. A song without an ending note feels incomplete. A book without its final page unfinished. So too with life. Death, unwelcome though it may be, provides the punctuation that gives sentences shape. Without it, immortality risks becoming an endless
run-on, stripped of the beauty that only ending creates. Thus, beyond physics lies the realm of closure, where science cannot tread, but humanity must.
Immortality may intrigue the mind, but closure sustains the heart. To face death is not only to seek survival, but to seek completion, a way to reconcile the finite with the infinite. Physics can describe the probabilities of life and death, but only culture, psychology, and spirit can give us the tools to face them. When humanity first gazed at the stars, death seemed absolute, final, and universal. Every culture, every philosophy, every religion arose in its shadow, shaping meaning from the inevitability of ending. Today, physics invites us to imagine otherwise, a reality where consciousness may never encounter its own death, where survival unfolds across improbable branches, and where immortality is not promise or punishment, but perspective. Perhaps the true lesson of quantum immortality is not whether we live forever, but how survival redefines what it means to live at all. If death cannot be personally experienced, then the fear of it becomes a paradox. We dread something that, by definition, will never appear in consciousness. From the inside, life is continuous, stretching seamlessly forward. From the outside, mortality is undeniable, recorded in the lives of others and in the fabric of history. This divide does not resolve into triumph or despair. Instead, it reveals a shift. Immortality is not an escape from death, but the recognition that awareness can only ever witness survival. What feels like eternity is not eternity itself, but the blindness of never experiencing an end. Seen in this light, immortality is neither gift nor curse. A gift implies something concrete bestowed, a power over time. A curse implies suffering imposed, an endless chain of unwanted continuity. But quantum immortality offers neither. It does not grant control, nor does it guarantee joy. It simply reframes perspective. You are always the one who endures, even if most versions of you do not. To call this a blessing is to ignore the solitude it may entail. To call it a curse is to forget that others truly die. It is both and neither, a lens rather than a verdict. This perspective shift forces a re-evaluation of meaning. If life stretches indefinitely in subjective awareness, then urgency may fade, choices may lose weight, and the arc of identity may fracture across centuries. Yet if death remains real in the eyes of others, then legacy and memory remain essential. The human task, then, is not to decide whether immortality is desirable, but to navigate the tension between survival and mortality, continuity and closure. We live as both immortal to ourselves and mortal to the world. Perhaps meaning lies not in choosing one truth over the other, but in embracing both. Philosophically, this duality mirrors existence itself. We are both individuals and members of a species, both fleeting and part of something larger, both observers and participants. Quantum immortality extends this paradox into time itself. It reminds us that reality may not be singular and that identity may not be indivisible. The I that continues is not a fixed essence, but a pattern carried forward, a story retold across countless branches. Life becomes less about permanence and more about persistence, the continual unfolding of awareness, moment by moment, regardless of outcome. And yet persistence is not the same as fulfillment. Survival alone does not guarantee meaning, just as endless tomorrows do not ensure purpose. Meaning arises from how life is lived within survival, from the choices, connections, and stories we create. If immortality is a shift in perspective, then perhaps its lesson is this: the true value of life lies not in how long it lasts, but in how deeply it is experienced. To live as though immortal is to risk monotony. To live as though mortal is to grasp the beauty of impermanence. The wisest path may be to hold both truths at once. In this sense, the final reflection is not about resolving immortality into gift, curse, but about accepting its ambiguity. Death may never be subjectively known, yet it shapes us through others. Life may continue endlessly in awareness, yet it remains fragile in community. The interplay of these truths defines what it means to exist in a universe both indifferent
and miraculous. Perhaps then, immortality is not a destination but a mirror.
It reflects our fears, our desires, and our need for meaning. It does not abolish death, nor does it guarantee eternity. It simply changes how we see. And in that shift of perspective, in recognizing that survival and mortality coexist, that endings and continuities intertwine, we may discover a richer way to live, not forever, but fully.